Well, this took a lot longer than I'd intended. I had thought this would be less effort than the Goblin Slayer video. I was very wrong. Anyway, greetings. I think we all understand that media follows trends. Something will become popular, and then creators will seek to make more along the same lines, and companies will seek to publish more along the same lines in a perpetuating cycle, until the next popular thing comes along. Rinse and repeat. The degree of cynical exploitation can vary, but it is a given that should one work of a particular type really take off, others with a greater or lesser degree of similarity will follow. Isekai, or different world, to provide its direct translation, has been overwhelmingly popular for an incredibly long time now, and while stories with isekai aspects have been around for decades, including fan favourites from before the term became well known, such as Inuyasha, Alhazard, or Dot Hack Sign, it arguably wasn't until Sword Art Online that the popularity went viral and became so dominant. Many people quickly became sick of isekai stories. Indeed, they were banned from some writing competitions in Japan, and it's an attitude I've always felt was quite unfair. Not banning them from official competitions, if you know they'll obliterate all other submissions, but the general dislike of, oh, it's another isekai, like you can tell anything about the story just from that. Like other genres, isekai doesn't really determine much about a given plot by itself. Something being a romance lets you know what to expect in broad terms, but doesn't allow you to predict what might occur. Something being science fiction or fantasy means you can prepare a selection of tropes that are likely to feature, but how they're employed is still dependent on the work itself. And of course, a work is not limited to only a single genre. After the initial surge of fantasy isekai with SAO, Log Horizon, Grimgar, and others, I had my speculation of what might come next. So far, I've been incorrect. The general fantasy isekai trend has really not abated so much. I reckon some of the Dungeon Maker stories might get picked up, but as of yet I'm still waiting. Which is a shame. One of my personal favourites is in that particular group. I live in optimistic pessimism. However, one subgroup I was not expecting to rise to prominence is Otome isekai, or that is to say, people being reincarnated not just into the wilds of games they had been playing, but specifically romance games designed for women. Personally, I find this fantastic, and enjoy the different ways this is being explored. I've seen both men and women isekai'd as both men and women, choosing to follow the game or subvert it, and how game-like the new world remains can vary greatly as well. One particular focus that has moved to the fore in this collection is that of the Otome villainess, the main rival to the game protagonist, typically a love interest for the primary capture target. These are games about winning the hearts of the selection of, usually men, the game's main character can woo, who is often a haughty, mean-tempered bully who eventually gets her comeuppance, though even this has seen glorious diversification. Something like Endo and Kobayashi's live commentary on the villainess sees the villainess be rehabilitated through the efforts of two people playing the game, commentating on her real thoughts to one of the male characters, revealing that she's actually a huge tsundere and tragic victim of the plot. Or the world of Otome games is tough for mobs, where the main character of the story is isekai'd as a background NPC, who then ends up befriending both the original heroine and the villainess, while a new character entirely makes things go increasingly off the rails. Or even cases where the main character is isekai'd as the villainess, as is the case with Otome game no Hometsu flag Shikanai Akuyaku Reijo no Tensei Shita Shimata, or I reincarnated into an Otome game as a villainess with only destruction flags, localized as My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom. And if anyone complains about my Japanese pronunciation, I'll repeat it in my worst Scottish brogue in my next video. Be warned. In one world, a 17-year-old high school girl enjoys her days sleeping in, being late to school, and spending far too much time playing Otome games, which she then discusses with her best friend, the one who got this overly rambunctious monkey girl, which is the only name she's ever given, into otaku hobbies, for better or worse. One day, she wakes up late as always, having spent all night playing her latest favourite game, rushes out of the house as always, carefreely rides her bike to school as always, but this day, she loses control, and rides her bike into a busy traffic intersection, losing her life. These are the memories which return to one Katerina Clays, the bratty, selfish, spoiled, 8-year-old daughter of a duke, when she trips and falls chasing after the prince of her kingdom and hits her head. After coming to and sorting through the confusing onrush of recollections, Kat reaches the horrifying realization that she finds herself in the world of her previously favourite game, in the body of the worst character possible, the villainess, doomed on every route she features in, be it exile or death. Welcome to Fortune Lover! After a frenetic period of racking her mind for all the details she can remember about her time with the game, Kat sets out to try and avoid her fate by confronting, countering, or avoiding all the doom flags raised in her future. Along the way, she's going to forge an entirely new story from the wreckage of the old as she lays waste to all understood notions of sense and rationality that would stand before her. Not intentionally, just because she's so, shall we say, straightforward. Stupid! That she never realizes when she's accomplished her goal, and so just continues on. Meanwhile, the rest of the cast quickly find themselves dragged along behind her incredible momentum, only cursory similarities to the original events they should participate in remaining. Not least because Kat generally ends up inadvertently stealing most of the establishing relationship moments for herself, even before the game is supposed to have started. The end result is one of the most popular harems in recent anime history being created, as Kat manages to redirect the affections of every single character onto herself, all the while remaining blissfully unaware and solely concerned with trying to avoid a terrible fate that she has long cast into the distance. That is every single primary ship in the show in the top 10 of that poll. At first place is the original light magic prodigy heroine of the game, the character that Kat completely accidentally took the place of, and remains clueless as to the overt affections of, even when directly told, leading to the joke that Katarina is so dense, not even light can escape her. Destruction Flagatome, HameFura, or Bakarina, to give it its far more commonly used fan title, from the Japanese word for idiot, was originally a web novel set to run for the equivalent of 2 volumes, later picked up for publication with 9 light novel volumes currently available, 5 of which have been translated into English so far. A manga version followed, also leading to a general spin-off anthology and one focused on just the girls, and a what-if alternative retelling where Kat doesn't regain her former life's memories until she's already at the Magic Academy and bullying Maria. As an aside, I consider it a shame the anime didn't provide even a cameo of Sienna from that series. And most recently has been the anime adaptation, which I am here to talk about. The first point to address is that the manga prioritizes different aspects of the story than the LM, whereas the novel was actually quite a dark story at times, dealing equally as heavily with just how terrible the lives of most of the characters were before Kat blew their problems apart like a wrecking ball, as it did following Kat's own misadventures in post-game survival prep. By contrast, the manga is almost purely a comedic work, to a high quality, and the anime is very much an adaptation of the manga, though not entirely, as the anime does cover some material the manga does not, as well as having a relatively small amount of anime-only content, and I'm going to perhaps subvert expectations here by saying I think this decision was actually very smart. Most of the time, anime original content is created either to waste runtime or provide filler, or because the anime has actually outrun the source material and so needs to make up its own stuff to keep going. Technically, this would count as the former, but rather than an effort to waste time because they don't have enough material for a proper cure, in this case it's more a considered choice to have the cure end at a specific point without sacrificing the pacing of set events. Without doing this, the anime would have overrun into Volume 3, and frankly, the fact the story was continued into later volumes past the original plotted ending is somewhat noticeable. Things are a little repetitive. Kat is dumb and misunderstood, but wholesome to everyone without exception, which charms new characters in ways she consistently fails to notice. But now without the overarching goal of reaching the end of the game. A second season has been announced, we'll have to see how it fares. With that said, though, I fail to understand why they chose to create new material when there existed material from the light novels which was not adapted that could have served the same purpose. The answer could be the point I previously made, that both the manga and the anime focus on the comedic aspect of the material, when the LNs balanced this with much darker fare. After most chapters following the misadventures of Kat in the novels comes a sequence from the point of view of whomsoever she's been interacting with, detailing the sadness and horror they've typically been living with until Cat came along and dragged them out of it, and there's very little humour to be found in these sections. Some of this material is featured. Anne and Achan have their interludes mostly included, and Maria's family situation is about half covered. Otherwise, it seems the material was instead made into accompanying audio dramas, which, as far as I'm aware, can be found online in various places. However, even with the material that is included, significant lacks apply. In Anne's case, the burns which invalidated her use to her scumbag father appear as a comparatively small area on her arm in the anime, whereas in the source material they cover her entire back. And the novels additionally go into much greater depth about just how destroyed her sense of self became by the time she became Cat's maid. She had honestly accepted her role in life as a disposable tool for others, saying what they wanted to hear, doing what they wanted done, and the original Katerina was no exception to this. It wasn't until her personality was overwritten that Cat became so unpredictable that Anne was forced to start thinking for herself in order to keep up, because she could no longer determine what the appropriate course of action to please Cat would be. Her interlude comes at the end of Volume 1, and provides Anne's opinion on each of the main characters and their relationship to Cat, each accompanied by Anne commenting about how thick Cat is, before providing Anne's own take on why Cat means so much to so many people, from her own perspective. The anime accelerates going through the material, even though it does touch on the primary beats. The situation with Maria and her mother is similar, but interesting due to the fact that, again, roughly half the material is covered, the most important elements, but around that the scenes, indeed the entire summer arc, are expanded, as though the anime strips out some of the depression and replaces it with a slice of life. Maria's desperation for someone to accept her as a person rather than just an aberration, and her mother's initial, though temporary, resentment, and later guilt and fear that she'd alienated her daughter. The points aren't lost, but they aren't as powerfully made. With Itsuko, we're told how she'd become scared of trying to interact with other people due to it not coming naturally to her, and how cripplingly lonely she was, and how she sought solace in books until the monkey girl landed on her, and from there, how she gained other friends through that connection and came to regard life as worthwhile, even after her best friend's passing, though she never stopped missing her. Again, the key points are included, but the depth of the pathos is lost. In fact, as an aside, I have to wonder if the true cause of this plot is actually Achan. It's her wish to be reincarnated and live a new life with her friend, like in her books. Her friend's last message was about a difficulty in clearing the game they both end up in, and Cat certainly isn't having the problems she was facing as a mere player. Ignoring the fact that time doesn't really need to be a factor when it comes to such a thing as reincarnation, it's still interesting that people who died at considerably different periods end up reincarnating at the same time as each other, unless a driving force is involved. There is confusion over the fact that Atsuko and Sophia seem to have delineated personalities, but there's no sign of the original personality of Katerina. But I may be thinking about this too much. It reminds me of one of the twists of Angel Beats I always found impressive, that the main character isn't necessarily the most important character from the perspective of the fundamental story. But I'm really digressing. Though the absence of these cast perspectives is the largest lack in the adaptation, others exist, consisting of minor changes to specific elements, such as Anne's presence from Cat, or Alan playing the piano at the graduation party, as opposed to having a violin duet with Giordo. But just as relevant as what is left out is the material selected to be included. I said previously the anime has both original content and manga-only content, at least manga-only until now. Quite often, original content for an adaptation is of lower quality than that taken from the source material, perhaps an inevitability given it's rarely provided by the original author, so is more akin to fan fiction than a legitimate expansion. I wouldn't say any of the anime original content in this case is egregiously terrible, though in my opinion the cases do range from merely okay to being a worthwhile addition to the setting. I would place the dungeon delve as the least justifiable inclusion here. Not only is it tonally dissonant, and more than any other scene portrays Cat as an actively incapable dumbass, instead of her usually earnest but average dumbassery, it also misses the opportunity to strike out away from both the LNs and manga by highlighting the fact that Cat is supposedly quite competent in swordplay. Not a master by any stretch, but she's been training consistently for years, as with her farming, but only the latter is ever focused on. Now, asking her to attack anything might be a bit too much, but the entire point of her practicing was to be able to defend herself, and even in a situation seemingly tailor-made for it to be a factor, it's still completely ignored. The scene with Kat and Mary studying is unremarkable, I would say. It includes the joke about just how prepared and serious Mary is about eloping with Kat to a faraway country, but otherwise doesn't seem to do much. I was a little sad they missed the opportunity to include Mary's dormitory preparations from when they all moved to the academy, showing her getting a schematic of the building and making plans to frustrate the boys being able to call on Kat. And then we have the Book of Desires, which is just glorious. So appropriately silly for the comedic approach, and I have to think what I interpreted as callouts to other anime were intentional. I mean, first, being able to isekai the cast of an isekai is immediately amusing to me, and then each of the individual vignettes has its own flavour of mania before Mary has enough of being an unwilling voyeur. Giordo channels Jojo into his bizarre adventure. Keith will take a cookie and eat it. And as far as Nicole goes, I personally was practically yelling at the episode going, "Throw a rose! Throw a rose, you tuxedo mask wannabe!" And the resolution of Kat eating so many sweets the book itself throws her up is so thematically appropriate. Though that being said, I do wonder if the implication of Kat being bulimic is treated too casually. But perhaps digging into that would be a needless complaint, given it never seems to have any consequences. Speaking of, Mary herself inevitably reminds me of a less psychotic Oi from Kantai Collection, which should really let someone imagine just how bad Oi was in that. But the less said about many aspects of that anime, the better. In addition to those three completely original inclusions, more content that could be considered anime original comes in the form of a much expanded summer break sequence, though technically the anime places the first event I'll mention before the summer break rather than during it. I've previously stated that Maria's family circumstances were only about half addressed in terms of novel material, but interestingly, the overall time spent around the issue is actually greatly increased. Kat and Keith are exposed to the rumours about Maria's parentage by way of villagers as they seek Maria's home. Kat finds another opportunity to practice her agricultural craft in order to help out her friend's kitchen garden, and overall, what was half a chapter in the original novels is expanded to an entire episode for the anime. The rest of the summer break is covered by another full episode, wherein the trip to the lake now features the entire main cast and adds, among other things, a highly amusing boating sequence where Giordo and Keith once again get to bond, you love to see it, and a picnic with a cameo from an untitled goose. The other two scenes are overtly manga only, in a sense. The Harvest Festival is an extra included with the third volume of the manga, whilst the sleepover, I say, is manga only and not from the light novels, but that isn't technically true, as it is a compilation of two manga stories, but ones which are part of Volume 5 of the light novels. Although the boys take on the same questions as Left Out, and Kat's rather eccentric fashion options are a new inclusion. Speaking of Volume 5, the short vignette about Alan and Kat climbing a tree at the academy is also from there. Rather than furthering the plot, it is more a collection of short stories from various periods in the characters' lives, which does once again raise the question I have already brought up more than once. Why, if there was already material available, did they make anything like the dungeon trip? I'd much rather have had the story about Giordo and Mary working kinda together to protect Kat from a social assassin. Oh well. With the filler material appropriately taking up enough runtime, the final episodes return to the main plot of Kat's destruction, beginning with one of the scenes I'm sure most readers of the light novels or manga have been anticipating, where Kat gets accused of bullying Maria in a manner reminiscent of the original game, only for her entire harem to ride to her somewhat rescue, given they proceed to defend her by unanimously pointing out that she's far too thick to have organised the sophisticated bullying she's being accused of. A fact reinforced by Kat only having the vaguest sense that perhaps there's something she's missing in what all her friends are saying that she can't quite identify, before her stomach growls and obliterates any potential introspection that, well, let's be fair, it was never going to happen. Now after that comes the disappearance of Maria, and Kat having another flashback to Atsuko teasing her with spoilers, leading Kat to confront a certain serious dick, and moving the atmosphere far more towards the dramatic than the comedic, a shift which maintains itself for the rest of the run. Kat awakens to her mother scolding her, only it's not the Duchess, but her mother from her previous life, and we actually get to see her eyes at last, though we still don't find out her name. Now, I would almost consider this the second part of Achan's interlude, only not from her perspective, as we see the other side of why these two girls meant so much to each other, before Achan tenderly tells Kat that, as wonderful as it is spending time with her again, she has somewhere else she belongs now, making Kat remanifest as herself? Really, trying to figure out how to refer to her is quite irritating, given her original identity is so overtly kept from the audience, whilst at the same time it's obvious that who she is as Kat is completely the same as who she was as the monkey girl. Indeed. Achan continues to tell her some key details about the hidden root of the game Kat has found herself confronted with, and what she should do next, finally bidding her friend farewell as Kat yells her goodbyes in return, before waking up in her whole new life, surrounded by her friends, who all wish to be more than that. To interject a personal preference, I wish there had been some new demonstrable aspect to Kat and Sophia's relationship after this point. Something to indicate that, even if neither of them is consciously aware of it, they are two best friends finally together again. We'd been given implications even before this point, but as I previously stated, given that Atsuko seems to be a separate identity from Sophia, whereas Kat is definitely just Kat, it doesn't feel like they're reunited. Rather, I was left feeling that Achan had just popped up to save her friend, and then went away again. To repeat myself, I guess this really isn't a plot which stands up particularly well to invasive analysis, which may well be why the manga decided to focus on making the comedic aspect the more enduring element. If so, I would actually consider it an intelligent choice. I would also say that I felt the distance between Atsuko's perspective interlude and her second appearance to save Kat from eternal sleep was a little too much in the anime, both in the sense of the time between the actual episodes, although that's only a factor when watching the original schedule. Now all the episodes are out, a viewer can watch at their own pace, but also the emotional continuity of events. Achan's point of view came at the beginning of Volume 2, and Kat's dream came halfway through that novel, with the separating chapters consisting of Kat befriending Maria, including Maria's backstory, the summer events, which are significantly less humorous, although not overwhelmed with depression, and the lead-up to the final confrontation with Maria's disappearance and the reveals about dark magic and Kat's nightmare. Not only is the pace much faster, but there's also less pure comedic material, unlike the anime which has full episodes of dedicated humour before the drama kicks back in. And so we come to the final episode, which is a noticeable shift from the rest of the anime, not just in the heavier subject matter, but also in one other key aspect. It seems to take far more from the light novels than the manga. Not completely. It also differs from both in having serious talk about his backstory in the secret room and to the whole group, rather than finding Kat alone at her field after the fact. And his reappearance in disguise after handing himself in does not feature at all. Indeed, his last visual in the Ministry has him as himself, along with another character from future material who I don't think would actually be present yet given the circumstances of their introduction, the scene it's calling forward to being something else taken from Volume 5. On the other hand, the group sneaking him into the graduation after-party doesn't happen in the manga, nor does the manga or the anime go into quite as much depth regarding what happened during the incident, such as the Man in Black's family already having been killed, thus the allowing him to return to them comment, just to highlight how much of a bitch Sirius's mother was. Something also reinforced by the fact that Raphael himself does actually receive a sense of Sirius's state of mind along with the memory transfer, that of being so tired he just wants to rest, having been forced to shoulder his mother's grudges for so long and from such a young age. Combined with his illness, he's already given up on life, and has no desire to continue on through Raphael's body. His mother had already managed to alienate her son even before going to such lengths and destroying another family. More than one, in fact. In closing, this has been an interesting adaptation. Compromises were certainly made, but I believe I can see the logic behind many of the choices, and certainly get the sense that the team who worked to bring this to the animated screen must have enjoyed what they were doing. The delivery of Ham throughout the run was excellent, and I frequently found myself thinking that the choice of music to set the various scenes to was very well chosen, right from those few bars of Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in the OP. In fact, I've caught myself humming the OP frequently over the past few months, and I've never been wishing something else had wormed its way into my head. To reiterate, however, those moving to the light novels in search of more of what the anime provides should be aware of the tonal difference. Better to stick to the manga in such a case. And we should all temper our expectations for the next season somewhat, as the material that has already been covered is generally regarded as superior to what is to come. All in all, however, it's nice to see an adaptation which does not seem to have fallen prey to sacrifices and compromises to get it to the screen. I'm not certain other shows I intend to cover will do as well. Many thanks for listening.